And the reason they felt they needed to do that, Jesse, is because if they told their audience the truth, that when gas is the most expensive it's been, flights are super expensive, that 5,000 kids decided to spend a weekend in summer traveling across the country to go hear from conservative speakers, maybe the audience of The View would think twice about all of their ideas. That's why they felt so compelled to try to smear our wonderful summit this last week.
Yeah, they have nothing else to talk about.
Imagine a world where the most unshakable voice on television, the one you thought was absolutely bulletproof, suddenly showed a crack. A seismic tremor, not with a bang, but with a quiet, unnerving hiss, indicating a slow, agonizing deflation. For decades, The View has stood as an immovable monument in the landscape of daytime television. Its gilded set, a velvet throne from which its hosts, particularly Whoopi Goldberg, dispense their daily doses of hot takes, societal critiques, and unfiltered opinions, all validated by the thunderous applause of an adoring live audience. Whoopi, the self-crowned empress of midday commentary, radiated an almost divine certainty, her pronouncements often treated as infallible truths, her every declaration met with unchallenged assent. She was the matriarch of an echo chamber, armed with an arsenal of quick retorts, half facts, and that ever-present applause meter humming along in the background, signaling her absolute reign. Her perceived invincibility was palpable, her authority seemingly absolute. It was a realm where logic rarely entered, where passionate conviction and high-volume certainty reigned supreme, and where direct challenge was as rare as a quiet segment.
CEO of Turning Point USA and the author of the new book, The College Scam. So, Charlie, do you accept The View's apology?
I mean, regardless of whether or not I accept it, the question is, do our students accept it? That's really what's at heart here. They went after our 5,000 students at our event there of high school and college kids. And look, I get attacked all the time. People say false things. I'm a public figure. But when you go after 16 and 17-year-olds that travel from across the country that then have to live for the rest of their life with a shadow over them because someone at ABC says that they might be linked to neo-Nazis.
Yet, what happens when an unseen force, operating far beyond the studio walls, decides to pinpoint a tiny yet glaring inconsistency? What transpires when cold, unforgiving logic confronts a meticulously constructed illusion of intellectual superiority? The world, quite unexpectedly, was about to find out. This wasn't going to be a dramatic on-air shouting match, a tit-for-tat debate in front of millions. Oh no, this was something far more insidious, a digital undressing executed with sniper-like precision by someone who hadn't even bothered to set foot in the hallowed halls of ABC. It was a silent, profound shift that sent ripples through the very core of mainstream media's self-assured narrative, proving that even the most formidable fortresses can crumble when faced with the relentless, unyielding brutality of facts. The kind of shift that makes you question everything you thought you knew about media, power, and the subtle art of the takedown. The fuse, as it often does, was lit during a seemingly innocuous segment on The View focusing on the Turning Point USA TPUSA Youth Summit in Tampa, Florida. This wasn't just any gathering. It was a massive congregation of over 5,000 high school and college students, many traveling from across the country, dedicating their summer weekend to hear from conservative speakers. In an era where gas prices were soaring and flights were astronomically expensive, the sheer number of young people committing to such an event was, for some, already a challenging fact to reconcile with their established worldviews. But instead of acknowledging this impressive turnout, the narrative presented on The View took a sharp, alarming turn, designed to immediately dismiss and discredit. Without skipping a beat, hosts on the liberal panel, with Whoopi at the forefront, astonishingly suggested that these young attendees, these 16 and 17-year-olds, were somehow linked to or had even embraced neo-Nazis. The chilling implication was clear. The event itself was tainted, the students somehow complicit with hate groups who were protesting outside the venue, not affiliated with or inside TPUSA's event. It was a claim delivered with the usual fanfare of chuckles, cheers, and unwavering head nods from the table of agreement, a particularly smug take that seemed destined to vanish into the daily news cycle, unburdened by scrutiny. They had nothing else to talk about, nothing but to try and insidiously smear a wonderful gathering of young people who dared to think differently, to challenge the prevailing orthodoxies of the mainstream, the audience at home, those outside. The immediate bubble of the studio watched in disbelief, a collective whisper of, "Wait, did she just make that up?" forming across the nation, a dangerous question indeed, especially when such a serious accusation was met with such enthusiastic applause.
in Monday's conversation about Turning Point USA, I put the young people at the conference in the same category as the protesters outside. And I don't like it when people make assumptions about me. And it's not any better when I make assumptions about other people, which I did. So, my bad. I'm sorry.
Okay.
So, the state,
But look, what did it take for us to get to the point of an apology? We had to threaten a lawsuit, Jesse. And by the way, we're still entertaining it. We're talking to some of the best lawyers out there that are experts in this. And as you know, these things can be very complicated. There's a lot of facts and circumstances around it. But we're not going to let this go, because you should not be able to smear 5,000 high school and college kids and then just be able to walk away with.
What The View likely didn't anticipate in their self-contained universe of pre-approved sound bites was the swift, uncompromising retaliation. Turning Point USA, led by its outspoken founder and CEO Charlie Kirk, wasn't about to let such an egregious and deeply damaging accusation stand, especially when it targeted impressionable young students who were now forced to live under a shadow cast by someone at ABC. They moved with the chilling precision of a seasoned legal team, dispatching a scathing cease and desist letter to ABC. With a colossal network behind The View, this wasn't just a strongly worded email, a mere complaint. This was a legal hammer, threatening a full-blown lawsuit for defamation, a move that could expose the network to significant financial damages, a massive public relations nightmare, and a bruising legal battle. The stakes instantly escalated from a casual talk show segment to a high-stakes legal showdown. The cavalier remarks, made with such absolute certainty, suddenly carried devastating real-world consequences. The sacred bubble of daytime TV, where commentary often felt consequence-free and truth was subjective, began to hiss with the unmistakable sound of a slow, steady deflation. And then, the unthinkable happened. The View, a show rarely, if ever, known for admitting fault or retracting its pronouncements, was forced to issue an on-air apology. Whoopi Goldberg herself, the very figure who had helped propagate the initial smear, stood before the cameras, delivering a retraction, an admission of error. It was a moment of stark vulnerability, a rare, almost shocking glimpse behind the impenetrable curtain of absolute authority, proving that even broadcast giants can be compelled to retreat when confronted with irrefutable facts and the threat of legal action.
We begin with a shocking apology just a short time ago from the ladies of The View to Turning Point USA. A war of words broke out after the conservative group was rallying the next generation of voters at its youth summit in Tampa, Florida this weekend. And the liberal panel just couldn't help themselves. The group sent a scathing cease and desist letter after hosts on The View suggested that Turning Point had embraced neo-Nazis who showed up outside the event. Sean, something that struck me in the cease and desist letter was the sentence that specifically The View hosts insidiously and cavalierly stated that TPUSA let the neo into its event, metaphorically embraced them, and it went on. Insidiously and cavalierly. And I felt that perfectly summed up exactly what those women were saying, which is something so deeply toxic and also so lightly thrown out there.
And so false. I mean, these were protesters outside of the event, right? They couldn't get in. These were not neo-Nazis inside of Turning Point USA. They were protesting outside on public grounds, and Turning Point tried to remove them.
But that, incredibly, wasn't the end of the story. Not by a long shot. Charlie Kirk wasn't content with just a perfunctory apology. He saw a deeper crack, a tiny yet persistent inconsistency, a logic gap so glaring it practically screamed for an intellectual dismantling. And so, like any astute internet opportunist armed with an audience and a subscription to basic verifiable facts, he went in for the kill. No, he didn't demand a seat across from Whoopi. He didn't enter the same zip code as the studio. He simply lobbed a precision-guided grenade over the wall from the perceived safety of his podcast, took a slow sip of coffee, and watched the internet do the rest. He calmly, almost dispassionately, laid out the backdrop, dissecting not only the egregious TPUSA incident, but also pulling up other examples of what he perceived as The View's gross elitism and profound detachment from reality. He referenced a past, equally controversial comment from Sunny Hostin, who had casually dismissed uneducated white women voting for Donald Trump, a statement that had ignited its own firestorm of criticism. Kirk didn't yell, he didn't rant. He simply presented his case, relying on the cruel, unflinching brutality of logic, wielding facts like a samurai sword against the styrofoam fortress of Whoopi's and The View's argument. This was a passive takedown, a masterclass in one-sided obliteration akin to a cat deliberately deliberately knocking a glass off a table without breaking eye contact. Precise, unapologetic, brutal. He wasn't mad, he seemed to convey, just deeply, profoundly disappointed. And here's precisely why.
I don't want to say too much, but we're going to have a lot of fun at the Department of Education. We're going to have a lot of fun.
Can I tell you something? Like, I've had quite a few people contact me about that particular post. Like, I'm sure I have 1/100th of what you're getting, but people are contacting me about cabinet posts. I'm like, I got
look,
nothing.
I mean, yeah, I'm actually, after this conversation, heading to Mar-a-Lago for a week, and we have a lot to sift through, and if I could be helpful, I have asked. I want to be actively involved in all things education, as you can imagine. And
as Charlie's surgical takedown rippled across social media, it rapidly escalated into a Category 5 meme storm. Instagram Reels, YouTube Shorts, and Twitter threads lit up with an explosion of edits, stitches, and immediate reactions. Reddit threads multiplied like rabbits in spring, each one dissecting and analyzing every syllable. People who hadn't watched The View in years suddenly found themselves intimately familiar with Whoopi's commentary style, precisely because Charlie had so effectively exposed it for what it truly was. A fragile house of cards built on a foundation of smug vibes and unverified assertions. Clips of his breakdown were passed around like forbidden scrolls, digital whispers, turning into deafening roars. Entire videos popped up with urgent clickbaity titles like, "Did Charlie Kirk just end The View?" and "How this one clip exposed everything about mainstream media." Viewers, now emboldened by this external validation, started asking dangerous questions, the kind that disrupt echo chambers. Wait, did she just make that up? And more damningly, how did this get applauded? The internet, that pitiless arena of digital gladiators, smelled blood, and it was ravenous. The facts weren't just in conflict with Whoopi's on-air monologue, they were dancing on its grave while filming a TikTok, a testament to the power of decentralized truth. This wasn't a takedown executed in a boxing ring with gloves and a referee. It was more akin to Charlie dropping a precision truth bomb in a parallel dimension, and the resulting ripple effect making Whoopi's studio chair squeak a little louder, a little more awkwardly the very next day. She hadn't lost in a debate. She knew she was in. She lost in a monologue she never delivered against a rebuttal she never saw coming, in a timeline where Google searches and public record hurt more than any on-air comeback. The fallout for those attuned to the subtle currents of broadcast television was exquisite. This wasn't a melodramatic soap opera where Whoopi literally crumbled into a puddle of tears on national television. It was something far more unnerving, more profoundly damaging. She kept talking, she kept showing up day after day, maintaining the illusion of business as usual. But something had fundamentally shifted in the energy surrounding her, a subtle yet profound alteration in her very presence. The once fierce fire in her eyes seemed dimmer. The previously unshakable confidence now carried a faint crack, visible only to the most discerning viewers. The once ferocious energy, that raw, unbridled certainty, felt just a tad rehearsed, a little too polished, as if she were desperately trying to reenact past highlights while quietly, internally, wondering if the audience was still buying the performance. It wasn't a traditional breakdown, it was quieter, subtler, and for those watching closely, far more delicious. It was the kind of breakdown where a rant, usually punctuated by enthusiastic applause, now ends in an awkward silence instead of clapping, where a dramatic point is followed by a nervous cough instead of a resounding chorus of yes. It was. The moment she glanced off camera for validation, an almost imperceptible flick of her eyes, and found nothing but the cold, indifferent lens of the studio camera. That, in the cruel court of public opinion, is the true tragedy of being dethroned. Nobody tells you you've lost until the room stops echoing with your own voice. And that room, it got very, very quiet. Even the producers, those unseen puppet masters, seemed to sense the profound shift. Topics became noticeably safer. The firebrand tangents cooled down, replaced by more cautious, less provocative discussions. There was more scripted laughter, less genuine edge. It was as if a silent memo had been circulated backstage titled "Let's not go viral again," and certainly not for the wrong reasons. You see, the true genius of this particular takedown wasn't about what Charlie Kirk said, it was about what he proved irrevocably. He demonstrated with chilling clarity that you didn't need a sprawling studio, a live audience, or 5 co-hosts in perfectly coordinated outfits to speak truth to nonsense. All you truly needed was a camera, a reliable Wi-Fi connection, and the sheer nerve to point out unapologetically that the Emperor's hot take, and by extension his entire wardrobe, had no clothes. For years, decades even, daytime TV had operated with the self-assured aura of a sacred oracle, its glittery sets, its carefully staged outrage, its clapping audiences trained better than Pavlov's dogs, all contributed to an environment where the host could utter virtually anything, literally anything, and be met with a chorus of approving nods, enthusiastic cheers, and an occasional "yes, queen" from someone strategically placed in the third row. Logic, inconvenient, and often messy, was rarely invited as a guest on The View, but high-volume, unwavering certainty, that was a permanent fixture, an indispensable co-host. Charlie Kirk, however, wasn't interested in being a guest. He weaponized clarity. He took the swirling, opinion-laden chaos that was The View's typical fare, and with almost surgical precision, calmly pointed to actual verifiable contradictions as if to say, "I'm not mad, not even angry, I'm just profoundly disappointed, and here's precisely why, backed by facts." It was the verbal equivalent of watching someone calmly untangle an impossibly knotted necklace while the other person insists, with increasing hysteria, that it's a noose. And suddenly, in that stark, unflinching light of reason, Whoopi Goldberg, long held up as the indestructible empress of daytime commentary, looked undeniably human, mortal, vulnerable even, not because anyone yelled louder than her or outdebated her in a shouting match, but because someone dared to bring a pie chart to a shouting match. That moment when a carefully edited, meticulously produced TV segment gets fact-checked meticulously by a guy in a hoodie on YouTube. That's the crack in the matrix. That's when you realize the Emperor's entire wardrobe was picked out by a dubious algorithm and a focus group. What made it all worse, or for those outside the echo chamber, infinitely better, is that Whoopi wasn't even there to hear it. This wasn't a takedown executed in a boxing ring with gloves and a referee. It was more like Charlie dropped a precision truth bomb in a parallel dimension, and the resulting ripple effect made Whoopi's studio chair squeak a little louder, a little more awkwardly the very next day. She hadn't lost in a debate she knew she was in. She lost in a monologue she never delivered against a rebuttal she never saw coming, in a timeline where Google searches and publicly available data hurt more than any on-air comeback. The real irony, the profound truth, is that the internet never needed her permission to notice. That's the insidious thing about echo chambers. They bounce your voice back so often with such consistent reinforcement that you start believing it's an entire choir, a symphony of agreement. But outside the studio, in the vast, untamed wilderness of the digital realm, people were comparing notes, doing their own homework, hitting pause and rewind, meticulously dissecting every statement. It was like The View was suddenly being audited by a nation of meme-making, receipt-pulling digital bloodhounds. And so, the illusion shattered, not with fireworks, not with dramatic screams, but with a quiet, data-driven roast session happening, far beyond the safety of commercial breaks. That's the power of a passive takedown. No microphone needed, no studio lights required, just a well-placed fact dropped into the public stream, amplified by the relentless algorithms of the internet, and poof, an empire of applause collapses under the sheer, unbearable weight of its own contradictions. Now, the immediate question isn't, will she bounce back? Of course she will. This is television. Everyone gets a second take, and the show, quite literally, must go on. The more profound, endearing question is, will the audience ever truly unsee it? Can they ever clap the same way again, with the same unthinking fervor, knowing what now lies starkly exposed beneath the carefully applied varnish of mainstream media? Because when the magic trick is explained, when the illusion is meticulously broken down and the wires revealed, you don't marvel at it the same way. When the curtain lifts, the all-powerful wizard looks suddenly, alarmingly ordinary. So next time Whoopi Goldberg raises an eyebrow, delivers a thundering monologue with righteous fury, and waits for the predictable crescendo of applause, just know there's a voice out there somewhere, calm, collected, meticulously checking the math. And you can bet your last brain cell the internet will be watching too. Calculators ready, screenshots primed. It wasn't merely a takedown, it was a reckoning. And for Whoopi Goldberg, it arrived not with a scream, but with 1,000 retweets. And a single brutal fact bomb dropped by a guy who never even walked on her stage. The hollow silence that followed spoke volumes, signaling a fundamental shift in the landscape of power, influence, and accountability in the digital age. Thumb up, thumb down.